Hello, my name is Adam Barlow, and this is my presentation on play-based learning through the Theories of Teaching and Learning class through Utah State. I wanted to start with a quick story. Some of you may have heard of this boy before. His name is William. He grew up in Malawi in a very impoverished circumstances, had very little money, very limited access to education, and he was like many kids in Africa. Was very creative with limited resources. I lived in Africa for a couple of years, and I got to see this firsthand, where kids could take anything from, wires and coat hangers to pop bottles and make little cars like this one up in the corner that even have a steering system, so you can push it with a stick and actually steer this car and direct its path as you push it. Anyway, William was like one of these kids, was a little engineer without having any formal education. He saw a need in his home. They'd never had electricity. So he found a dynamo, or a small generator that you can hook up to a bicycle, and essentially turned it into a windmill of his own. His ingenuity was noticed, and eventually he was given the opportunity to speak on a TED Talk. It was only 5 minutes long and in broken English, but gained a lot of attention, and he has since been able to go to school in the United States, graduated with an engineering degree, and has been able to make a big impact on his country, his family, back in Malawi. So cool story, and I just saw a lot of play-based parallels in his story, where someone is given an opportunity to, someone's constructive learning opportunities come through their play, and eventually find utilization in the real world. So just as a brief overview, we'll go over some historical figures, some fundamental tenets, teaching implications, theory critiques, and then just finally my references. So historical foundations, there are four main people credited with kind of the early formal conceptualization of play-based learning. You've got Rudolf Steiner, Maria Montessori, Lev Vygotsky, and Jean Piaget. You can see for a brief moment they were all contemporaries, not for very long, only a matter of about 10-ish years, where their careers have actually overlapped when they were all practicing, but interesting to see how far back this goes. So Rudolf Steiner is the earliest. He was born in Austria, lived from 1861 to 1925. He had an interesting philosophy called anthroposophy. I'll let you read that one. I could never pronounce it. And holistic. His big principles were that there was developmental stages aligned with curriculum. He emphasized arts and creativity in all education. His big thing was holistic, intellectual, emotional, physical education all came together. Imagination was a big part of it, and creativity. Education was delayed until, and I can quote, after students are losing their baby teeth. So at that time, they're 7 or 8, was the time he found it was appropriate to begin real education. And play-based learning, it was a big deal for him in early years. That was kind of the years that he encouraged that as a time for imaginative and creative play. Global impact, Steiner's schools are still used worldwide today. They're very informal, they're very open, and there's little to no testing whatsoever. And I thought it was interesting, our textbook has no mention of it whatsoever. In fact, he was a little bit hard to find in a lot of spots. But there are schools today. They're called the Steiner Waldorf. It's German, Waldorf. It's a combination of his name and the first school's name that was in Stuttgart, Germany, in 1919. You can see that in the United States there are about 200, so not a ton, but enough to be, to be significant. And then quite a few more in Europe, about 4 times as more in Europe. Another early proponent of play-based learning is Maria Montessori. There's a lot of products nowadays named after her that fall within her paradigm and her teaching philosophy. She was a constructivist and a humanist. Her key principles were that there were sensitive periods in a student's life, optimal times for specific play and learning. Everything was child-centered. All education was centered towards this child's needs. Play and learning was viewed as a child's work. So our work is work, a child's work is to play, and that there's purpose in that play. And that learning through hands-on exploration and discovery can accelerate that. There also is, just like Steiner, there's a lot of schools, much more actually, in the world today, continuing in the world today, that are considered Montessori schools. You've likely heard of them before. I also found it interesting that there was no mention of Montessori education in our textbook either. The first school that Maria Montessori opened up was called the Casa di Bambini, which is like the house of the children. And this is essentially what it would have looked like. They had children learning, but you don't see a chalkboard and like rows and seats and that kind of stuff. It was very active, very engaged learning experience for students, where they were directed most of the learning themselves. Today, there are almost 16,000 Montessori schools worldwide. This is one that, today you can see it's a very, very open, just like this one before. Lots of toys and opportunities for experimentation and play. Lev Vygotsky, I won't say a lot about him, mostly because we cover him a lot in constructivist learning theories. But he's had significant and lasting impacts on education. His big thing, of course, is the zone of proximal development, which is more than just scaffolding. It includes social cultural theory, that the social interaction and cultural context shape cognitive development. His argument for play and learning was that play provides a zone for learning and development. It also has collaborative play enhancing cognitive abilities. Educational impact, it's everywhere today. You see that in all sorts of curriculum and educational philosophies are modeled after his work. So this is Lev right here. I failed to mention, but he was Russian. We'd only had a short amount of information from him because of, he only lived till he was in his about 44 and died of tuberculosis. But we see a lot of this scaffolding today. A lot of I can do alone, and in play theory I can play alone, I can practice, but with help of a professional or someone, the wiser other, I can also develop that. Jean Piaget, almost goes without saying, but he was also a significant figure, is considered one of the most influential early child psychologists ever. And he was Swiss from 1896 to 1980, so he had a pretty long life. He's considered a constructivist and a social cognitivist. So his key concepts, cognitive development stages, you've got 4 major times. Sensory-motor and pre-operational are more for children. Children, like I was going to play and learning, play is a vehicle for cognitive development, and that is where assimilation and accommodation occur. It provides a major environment for it. Educational impact, transformed understanding of child development and learning, and these remain very influential, and of course both Vygotsky and Jean Piaget are prominent figures in our text. One quote I really liked from Jean Piaget was that children are, quote, lone scientists, that children develop an understanding of the world as they have self-guided inquiry. But he has a funny quote. It's about, if I can look at a bug, I can pick it up, I can see what happens if I put it on a leaf, I can step on it, I can just experiment, all that kind of stuff. So, kind of fun. So fundamental tenets, there's a lot of themes between all of them, and overall you could say that they're very holistic, that all 4 of these theorists believe in interconnection between cognitive, social, emotional, and physical aspects of the child's growth. There's active engagement, so the student or the child is leading the learning. There's child-centered approaches as well, that interests, needs, and developmental stages of each student is kind of the primary director for topics and learning activities, and social interaction. So that's not a lone. This is especially between Vygotsky and Montessori, that learning and especially play is most effective when it is social. Some big differences, I won't go into this too much, but each of them had, you can skim over this, had some different emphases on what play theory really would look like in practice, differences between the role of play in general, I guess, and their educational settings, like where that happens, philosophical foundations, and the relationship of the teacher with the students. So all similar, but a little bit different. If you were to sum it up in 3 points, I found that learning can be, I would define it this way, that learning can be an exploratory, playful experience. As students play with the world around them, they construct an understanding of it, and of themselves, and other people, I should add. And the environment plays a significant role in learning, particularly for children. So, teaching implications. So, when we're using this in the classroom, some themes that they need to be to make play theory work is that the activities need to be self-chosen as much as possible. They should be enjoyable for the child, not something that is enjoyable for the teacher necessarily. There might be some frustrations or disagreements, but overall, it's a positive experience for the student. It's pretty unstructured, widely unstructured. In its purest form, there's no structure whatsoever. There's a lot of pushback from, and obviously I'm sure a lot of teachers watching this are squirming a little bit, like, ooh, no structure whatsoever, huh? But I'll talk more about that in a moment. It's process oriented. There's no end in learning or learning goal. Instead, it's the process of the play that's important. In make-believe, this is a big part of it, especially for younger children, that imagination and playing pretend are significant facets. So to compare traditional academic programs with play-based, some academic characteristics of this: teacher-centric. There's a right answer for everything. Students follow the teacher's lead, and there's a larger focus on numbers, literary skills, and reading, writing, all of that. And then play-based programs are child-centric. They help develop leadership and social skills. Teachers are more facilitators, less of the leaders. They let the students be more take the role of a leader. And academics and skills are built into play experiences. So their interests provide the vehicle for learning rather than learning providing the vehicle for the other way around. So theory critiques. So some pros and some cons. I liked this list. That sums it up pretty well. Some pros of unstructured play are that it encourages creativity, encourages democratic thinking, encourages communication skills, builds resilience, encourages self-regulation, and helps children let off steam. It's a stress reducer, not only children, but also adults. Some cons, however, is that it may not actually lead to learning. The destination is vague, and if you haven't marked a target, it's hard to hit it. It's not always the best approach. It's a very circumstantial thing. Children still need guidance often. If you just put children in a classroom and expect things to happen, it's more likely that it won't than without some sort of guidance. Parents generally don't agree with it, as well as administrators. It's really hard to get buy-in from parents and faculty. That's why generally a Montessori school is a private school, or it's separate from the public school system, although about 9% of Montessori schools actually are funded by, are government funded. Could be unsafe in some circumstances, and that would be particularly true in like a shop class. That would be a terrible place to play with a chop saw or to play with a table saw. And learn through experience that way that, what's safe and what isn't. That would clearly be a bad one. Another, probably more realistic, is with young children, there needs to be more safety considerations. And could lead to social bullying and exclusion. It is possible that if students lead everything, they may not have an understanding of how to accommodate for differences, and they may not be able to regulate things very well between each other. So in some, play-based theory can be effective It's not employed very often. There is research supporting it when it's structured. Ironically, when play-based unstructured play is structured a little or has some guiding principles or tenets, it can be very effective, but it doesn't often spontaneously occur. So if you'd like to learn more about this, I have a bunch of links in here, all of this, and the handout will also have some more reference materials for you as well. So thank you for your attention, and have a wonderful week.